But you know what's killing me? I gained back 25. I feel such shame.
If diet programs have not worked for you, you may have an eating disorder. The Rader Institute, 1-800-255-1818.
Accommodations for guests of the Geraldo Show were provided by the new luxury Ramada Renaissance Times Square Hotel at 48th Street and 7th Avenue, New York City. Promotional fees have been provided by...
Announcing Alpine Lace fat-free cream cheese products.
Now I can have my cream cheesecake and eat it too?
New Alpine Lace fat-free.
Jonelle presents salon-style sculptured nails. Easy to apply, just stick it, buff it, gel it, set it. You'll love it. Gel nails from Jonelle.
Thanks, everybody. We have information for victims or addicts of pornography. There's an organization called Enough is Enough. The address, Post Office Box 888, Fairfax, Virginia, 22030. Richard Hammer's book, Beyond Obsession. I'm going to thank all our guests. Leighton, tell us who saved you.
A lady I met in Utah saved me, got me into a doctor. We had a platonic relationship for 4 years.
She got you off drugs?
She got me off drugs.
You have a positive outlook?
I got very positive. I'd like to thank Dr. Thomas T. Evans at Infectious Disease Center in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Now in color, scamming, jamming, and hamming it up. Groucho Marx, Copacabana. Thursday night at 7 on Channel 9. This is Chicago's Midday News.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Sanders. Coming up on the Midday News, after leaving a trail of death and destruction in Florida, Hurricane Andrew is now taking dead aim on the state of Louisiana. We'll have a live report on the cleanup in South Florida. Also, we will hear live from Governor Bill Clinton. The Arkansas governor is addressing the American Legion Convention here in Chicago. And we'll also find out what President Bush had to say to that same group when he spoke to them just over an hour ago. Also, a jury decides whether an airline pilot convicted of murdering his wife is eligible for the death penalty. Now getting back to our top story, let's go live to Florida, where 12 people are dead and tens of thousands of others have been left homeless in the wake of Hurricane Andrew. Let's go live now to John Zarella.
This is John Zarella reporting from Naranja Lakes in Homestead, Florida. The eye of Hurricane Andrew passed over this area, and as you can see, the damage is beyond belief. There you can see some clothes left hanging. The stories here are poignant and tragic. Several people may have lost their lives in this area. Reports that a couple of people literally went into their bathroom and huddled until the storm passed. Others, during the eye of the storm, came out crying in groups, trying to find people who had something left to go to, somewhere else to hide. The people here are hoping that they can get the National Guard in here. They are hoping that they can get Red Cross in here. But this is just like many of the areas around South Dade County. They all look like this. This is not the exception. This is the rule here in South Dade County. One area after the other has been literally decimated by this storm as it cut a swath completely across South Dade and exited on the west coast of Florida. There is no power, there is no water. People here are complaining that they hear of people complaining that they have no electricity. These people have no homes. They're not only frustrated, they're angrier, and they need quite a bit of help. They're not sure who they can turn to. People are packing belongings and just trying to make the most of what's left and get out of this part of Florida. John Zarella reporting live from Naranja Lakes.
Of course, at this hour, Hurricane Andrew is swirling with its deadly winds through the Gulf of Mexico, preparing to bear down on the Louisiana coast. Let's go now live to Tom Skilling, who's tracking Andrew's progress.
And Steve, we have the very latest data, but first a dramatic three-dimensional look at this storm and its associated spiraling bands of thunderstorms. That, after all, is what makes up a hurricane moving toward the coast. Here's a more standard two-dimensional view looking down from on top. New Orleans sits right there, Mobile, Alabama right there, and you can see the storm now about 175 miles south-southeast of New Orleans, moving northwest at about 18 miles per hour. This is the latest radar composite and the so-called feeder bands, which are bands of extremely strong wind and heavy rain producing activity, moving now into the Mississippi Delta area. And here from the Slidell, Louisiana radar, which is near the home base of New Orleans right there, you can see the hurricane moving on shore. In fact, we even see, or moving up toward the shoreline, you see the eye wall right there. That's that eye wall that went over Homestead, Florida, and decimated that community south of Florida. It's been a big blocking high, but now as it weakens, it looks like Andrew is starting to turn as expected toward the Louisiana coast. And this we've just updated now. This is the current storm position, about 175 miles south-southeast of New Orleans, which is right there. And you can see that it's expected to move up to this position by this evening, and late tonight, probably around or just beyond midnight onshore, it looks like near Vermilion Bay. That would seem to affect cities like New Iberia and Morgan City quite directly, with a strong onshore wind, and storm surges are expected to reach 10 to 15 feet there, less up in the New Orleans area, but nonetheless they're advising folks to get out of the area. Then it will go onshore, and it could be that some of the remnant moisture of that storm will come our way later in the week. Here is the storm now in the wider view, and you can see how the upper winds are kind of moving up this way, so we'll bring some moisture up into at least the lower sections of the Ohio Valley later in the week. Now, the hurricane warnings have been extended westward to the Bolivar Peninsula, which is near Houston and Galveston. That is running all the way eastward, then. Those warnings are to Pascagoula, Mississippi, and then they turn to a watch over to Mobile, Alabama. These are the current coordinates. The top winds are 140 miles an hour, central pressure 27.88. So this is a Category 4 storm on the 5-category hurricane scale, 5 being the strongest, and a little change in strength expected before landfall, but that's a massive storm heading toward that direction, Steve.
It would seem almost fortuitous that this storm right now is bypassing the two major population centers on the Gulf Coast, Houston and New Orleans, and going right in between.
Well, absolutely. In fact, the farther we can keep that storm away from New Orleans, the less direct the onshore flow that would pile the storm surge onshore there. And of course, as you know, New Orleans is in the unique position of sitting below sea level, so they have a levee all around the city that keeps the ocean out, and they can handle tides, we're told, of up to 5 feet above normal levels. But you get beyond that, the water starts spilling over the levees, and they're in big trouble. I don't know that they're out of the woods yet, and certainly folks in that area are advised to leave the area, but it certainly looks like the south-central Louisiana coastline seems to be shaping up as the point of landfall for this storm, and again, toward midnight or just beyond tonight, Steve, a mean storm.
Very briefly, what's the possibility that Andrew will continue to gather strength and intensity as it moves over the ocean?
The Hurricane Center is saying right now that there should be little change in strength they expect by landfall, but keep in mind the water is shallow and warm there, so it'll have to be watched, Steve. Once you bring the circulation of a storm like that over land, it stops intensifying because it no longer has the latent heat energy it gets from seawater to fuel it. But we'll have to watch it. It looks like 140-mile-an-hour winds right now.
See you back in a minute.
Okay, Steve.
Let's update the situation in New Orleans right now. That's where most businesses are shut down today in preparation for Andrew's arrival. About 1.5 million people are being urged to evacuate. As Dave McNamara tells us, that includes the Barrier Reef Island of Grand Isle.
It's a routine these longtime residents of Grand Isle have been through a half dozen times or more. At the first sign of a hurricane, the 1,500 residents of this coastal island are sent packing.
Don't look good at all.
Jack Hankins moved to Grand Isle from Mississippi 22 years ago, and he does not hesitate to evacuate.
What do you think would happen to your home if that thing came through here? Come through here at a Category 5, wouldn't be much left, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, I'm in a panic. Trying to figure out what to take, you know, when you start eliminating down what's most valuable.
Tim and Carol Torrance stayed on Grand Isle when a comparatively mild Hurricane Juan moved ashore several years ago. This time, they're also leaving.
Now, I feel like it'll be a total disaster if it does come in. I was here for Juan and was trapped down here for 7 days by the flooding in Golden Meadow.
Residents of Grand Isle have to leave early because their only escape route, LA1, floods with only a 5-foot rise in the tide.
Hurricane Andrew has come out of Florida like a bull right out of the chute in the Western Rodeo.
Grand Isle's mayor and civil defense director began urging people to leave the island, trying to convince even the diehards that no one should stay behind.
I tell them, either leave or let me know they're next of kin. That's the best way I can put it to them. It's nothing to play with. It's a bad storm. It's one of the bad ones. It's coming.
In Grand Isle, we call hurricane protection hauling freight. There's no such thing as hurricane protection on the Barrier Island. So the only thing we can do is expect the worst and hope for the best.
In recent years, the Gulf of Mexico has taken a toll on Grand Isle. The island's protection levee has been washed away several times, and few people here doubt that it will disappear again if the sea turns angry in the fury of a hurricane.
That's reporter Dave McNamara, station WWL. We hope to have a live report from Morgan City, Louisiana, later in our news hour. Morgan City is just to the west of New Orleans. It appears to be the area that Andrew is taking aim on. That's later in our newscast. Let's talk politics. What would a presidential address during an election campaign be without demonstrators? Well, the protesters stood outside the site of President Bush's speech to the American Legion convention today. The demonstrators held placards touting their position on some of the election issues, including abortion and AIDS, others showing their support for Democratic contender Bill Clinton. A separate group chiding the president for his administration's actions toward Haiti. The demonstrators determined to get their messages across to Mr. Bush as the president's motorcade sailed by. Both President Bush and Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton are here in Chicago today, here to address the 74th annual convention of the American Legion. Mr. Bush appeared first. He started off by saying he would not deliver a partisan speech to the group because, as he said, they already sacrificed enough for their country. The remarks drew laughter and then applause. Then there was a studied silence as the president told of how he felt when he went off to war at the age of 18.
Like many of you, I was scared, but I was willing, and I was young, but I was ready. And like so many of you, I had barely lived when I began to watch men die.
As we continue to highlight the president's speech, Bush went on to describe how the world became safer under his administration and pledged to safeguard our shores and others from the world's aggressors.
In spite of freedom's great gains, I know that our world today is more uncertain, more unpredictable than the world we've left behind. The Soviet bear may be extinct, but there are still plenty of wolves in the woods, renegade rulers, outlaw regimes, madmen we simply cannot allow to get a finger on the nuclear trigger. You have my word. This president will never allow a lone wolf to endanger the security of the United States of America.
And Mr. Bush became quite adamant when he defended his decision to stop the war against Iraq last year, leaving Saddam Hussein in power.
The Middle East could well have become a nuclear apocalypse, and that is what was at stake. And now some who were faint-hearted and stood in the way of crushing Saddam's aggression now have the gall to say, you stopped the war too soon. And some also say that General Norman Schwarzkopf wanted to march into Baghdad and get Saddam. False.
And finally, the president spoke of free and fair trade, suggesting that should be the wave of the future now that the Cold War has ended. As for the GOP plan, President Bush says this is what America needs to get ready for the game.
Let's build on the fundamentals of lower tax rates, limits on government spending, less red tape and regulation, and more trade and more competition. To generate the growth that means more opportunity and more jobs.
And as we mentioned earlier, Democratic nominee Bill Clinton is preparing to address the American Legion convention. He's now on the podium. When he begins his speech, we'll certainly go to that live. Well, more campaign politics. While President Bush and the GOP keep plugging away at the family values theme, it appears the Democratic ticket is deflecting any possible damage. John Avishon has the story in the nation's capital.
The Republicans' family values attacks on the Democratic ticket, launched full bore in Houston last week, keep getting hotter. But there are some signs that not all the GOP bombs are hitting their targets. Polling after the Republican convention shows more Americans do see George Bush as the better defender of family values. But many who feel that way are like this man.
President Bush is probably just grabbing onto it because he doesn't have much else to grab onto.
Like so many Americans, for me, family comes first. When family values are
Vice President Quayle identified family values with the traditional two-parent home with only dad working. But that, says a new study, is no longer the norm.
About half of all children today are expected to spend some part of their life in a single-parent household.
Some of the Republicans' harshest attacks were reserved for Hillary Clinton. Example, Pat Buchanan blasting her for, his words, comparing marriage to slavery and favoring 12-year-olds suing their parents. Those based on law review articles she wrote in the 70s. The attack was outright distortion, legal scholars say.
Her point about wives being something like slaves or Indians on a reservation was merely that historically wives could not own property, could not sign contracts, could not even inherit property, could not sue their husbands even in the worst cases. And she was merely pointing out historical fact about the law, and she stated that that is not a good situation, and indeed the law has recognized that, and all of those disabilities of wives have gradually disappeared over the years.
Kids suing their parents is another emotional hot button.
The general rule is, and Hillary Clinton's article agrees with this, that generally children are not independent from their parents and do need parental consent for most of the things they do, and it's only in the extraordinary case of tremendous injustice, abuse, physical or mental cruelty to the child.
Even after the withering Republican values offensive last week, well over a third of Americans, 37%, told pollsters they think the Clinton ticket would best protect family values.
I like Clinton's ideas of family values much more.
But it's not a theme the Bush Quayle campaign will abandon anytime soon. Top campaign strategists suggest the edge could get even harder. And a tight race on a muddy track is the way one pundit sums up the outlook as the campaign enters its final 10 weeks. In Washington, John Aubuchon, WGN News.
After addressing the American Legion convention here in Chicago just a little over an hour ago, Mr. Bush left for Detroit, and Governor Clinton, who is just preparing to address that same convention, will leave for Dallas this afternoon. We hope to hear from Governor Clinton in just a few minutes. Overseas, more combat in what we once called Yugoslavia. The presidential palace and the Bosnian military headquarters in Sarajevo came under heavy mortar and rocket attack today as Bosnia's military commander reported some advance of his troops northwest of the city. The commander began the new Bosnian offensive this past weekend. Officials say the combat over the last 4 days has been the heaviest fighting of the civil war so far, claiming at least 22 lives. In other developments, the European community's chief negotiator for peace in the former Yugoslavia has resigned. Lord Carrington's resignation comes one day before a peace conference sponsored by the EC and the United Nations was to convene in London. Lord Carrington's year of efforts had produced many ceasefire agreements, all of which were quickly violated. The tragedy of the Civil War in Yugoslavia is touching the hearts of some Chicagoans. Here, several Croatian-American groups are appealing for help for victims of the fighting. Alderman Luis Gutierrez of the 26th Ward joined a group of representatives at a news conference today at St. Jerome's Croatian Church. Gutierrez and the others are urging Chicagoans to make contributions to people suffering from the war. They hope to get people to support Bosnian children at an annual of $600 per child. For more information, you can call Save the Children effort. The number is 312-986-1129. Violence in Germany overnight. In the eastern town of Rostock, neo-Nazi youth set fire to a hostel housing Vietnamese and Romanian refugees, and then they battled police. This was the third straight night of anti-foreigner rioting. No refugees were reported to have been injured by the firebombs that were hurled Monday night, but 10 police officers were hurt. In Washington, Israel and Arab negotiators are meeting in the 6th round of talks in the Middle East peace effort. All sides are expressing optimism about these sessions, which began yesterday. Shortly after the meetings kicked off on Monday, Arab leaders praised Israel for agreeing to a comprehensive settlement involving the exchange of land for peace. This round of talks is scheduled to go on for a month. Israel is meeting separately with Syria, Lebanon, and a third team divided between Palestinians and Jordanians. As we told you earlier, Democratic nominee Bill Clinton is now addressing the American Legion convention underway here in Chicago. Let's pick up some of his remarks now live.
Who has now volunteered for another tough mission, serving as my Veterans Coordinator in Illinois. I know it's fashionable for some politicians to claim that they won the Cold War, but I know who won the Cold War. You did. No American would be free today if it weren't for the heroic sacrifices that you and all the millions of men and women who have served America in times of trouble. I feel a special sense of gratitude because, as your commander has already told you, you not only gave me the freedom you won for all Americans on the field of battle, you also gave me the opportunity to serve myself in the arena of public service. It is literally true that I might not be here today if it weren't for the American Legion. Without your dedication to the youth of America, which gave me the opportunity to attend American Legion Boys State and American Legion Boys Nation. If that hadn't happened, I might not be standing before you today as my party's nominee for president. I still remember that July afternoon in 1963 in the Rose Garden of the White House as I was waiting eagerly, a young 16-year-old, to shake President Kennedy's hand. I couldn't help thinking that only in America could someone who came from a background like mine be as fortunate at that age to meet the President of the United States. I knew then that I wanted to answer President Kennedy's call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Just 3 months before a lot of America's innocence died when President Kennedy was assassinated, those were warm and hopeful summer days. And the lessons the American Legion taught me are those I have tried to live by all my life. Lessons about the greatness of America and the responsibility to stand up for what you believe. The strength of our people and the durability of our Bill of Rights. The nobility of public service. That summer, I learned from the American Legion that being a citizen involves responsibilities as well as rights, including the responsibility to love your country even enough to right its wrongs, the responsibility to get involved, to make a difference, to serve. I'm not the only American whose life has been made better by your continuing service here at home. From baseball to the Boy Scouts, from keeping the Veterans Hospital open to keeping kids off drugs, from addressing homelessness to preventing child abuse, to instilling a deep sense of patriotism into still another generation of Americans, our nation owes you a debt of gratitude. Like any adult, I have to take full responsibility for the mistakes I've made in life, but the American Legion deserves a large measure of credit for whatever success I have enjoyed.
You're watching Governor Bill Clinton addressing the American Legion Convention underway here in Chicago. We'll have more news right after this.
This is the story of two houses. 4 years ago, the Taylor house was painted. In the same year, the Baker house had beautiful vinyl siding from Sears installed. Today, the Taylor house is peeling and cracking again. But the Baker house, with vinyl siding from Sears, looks as good as the day it was installed.
If you want to enhance the beauty of your entire home, or if you have a brick home with just hard-to-paint eaves and overhangs, do it right with maintenance-free vinyl siding from Sears. And do it now, because if you're a homeowner and you call now, you'll receive a free home inspection and estimate. Call now to find out how Sears siding improves the look and helps increase the value of your home. Our siding comes in a rainbow of colors, guaranteed never to peel or crack. It's installed over a full layer of genuine Dow styrofoam insulation.